Pemberton Township, New Jersey, November 3rd, 1879. The first hard frost had already painted the maple leaves crimson and gold across the pine barrens, warning of the harsh winter ahead, while his neighbors prepared for another brutal season by stacking cordwood in neat rows and praying their stone fireplaces wouldn't fail them when the mercury dropped below zero. Klaus Miller was building what they called the most ridiculous contraption they'd ever seen in their collective decades of frontier living. The stocky German immigrant, his weathered hands scarred from 30 years of blacksmith work, had spent 3 full weeks hauling fieldstones into his modest log cabin, carefully arranging them into what looked like a massive stone platform, exactly where any sensible person would place their bed for warmth and comfort during the long winter months ahead. Each stone had been personally selected during Klaus's weekly trips to the abandoned quarry outside Trenton, where he'd spent hours testing each granite boulder for specific density and heat retention properties that his neighbors couldn't begin to understand or appreciate. The smallest stones weighed 15 pounds, while the largest approached 40 pounds each, and Klaus had transported over 8,000 pounds of carefully chosen granite using nothing but a hand-built wooden cart and his own stubborn determination. His neighbors watched this back-breaking labor with growing bewilderment, unable to comprehend why anyone would voluntarily move such enormous quantities of stone into a living space that should be warm and comfortable. Samuel Hartwell, the township's most experienced carpenter, and a man who'd successfully built 47 cabins across 3 counties over the past 25 years, stood in Klaus's doorway, shaking his head in genuine dismay and professional concern. At 52 years old, Hartwell had survived winters that killed lesser men, had seen families freeze to death in poorly heated cabins, and had never witnessed anything so fundamentally wrong-headed in all his years of frontier construction. "That's the damnedest fool thing I ever saw, Muller. You're going to freeze to death on that pile of rocks come January. Mark my words, we'll be chopping you out of there come spring thaw." Thomas Creek, a grizzled trapper and hunter who'd survived 15 brutal New Jersey winters in cabins much smaller and more primitive than Klaus's, was even more direct in his criticism and increasingly vocal about what he saw as dangerous foolishness. "Rock don't hold heat worth a damn, Klaus. I've slept on stone floors during my trapping days up north of the Adirondacks, and it's like lying on a glacier in January. Sucks the life right out of you. You'd be better off sleeping right next to your fireplace like the rest of us sensible folk who want to see another spring." Even Martha Patterson, the settlement's schoolteacher and Klaus's closest neighbor, a woman known for her practical wisdom and genuine concern for everyone in the community, couldn't hide her growing worry for the German immigrants' sanity and safety. Martha had taught school in 3 different frontier towns across Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and she prided herself on the practical wisdom gained through hard experience, watching families struggle to survive harsh winters with inadequate preparation. "Klaus, honey, those stones are going to suck every bit of warmth right out of your body faster than you can possibly make it. Stone floors are the coldest things in any house, which is exactly why we cover them with wooden planks and thick rugs. What you're building there looks more like a tomb than a bed, and I'm genuinely worried you won't survive your first night on that thing." Dr. William Hayes, who'd studied medicine at the prestigious Philadelphia College and represented the settlement's highest learning and scientific authority, offered perhaps the most damning assessment from a medical and scientific perspective. From a purely medical perspective, this construction violates every established principle of maintaining human body temperature during cold exposure. The human body generates approximately 100 BTUs of heat per hour during rest, which isn't much when you're fighting extreme cold. Stone has extremely high thermal conductivity, meaning it will draw heat away from the human body faster than that body can possibly produce it, leading inevitably to hypothermia, even indoors. This isn't just inefficient heating, it's potentially fatal. But Klaus smiled that quiet smile his neighbors had come to recognize and kept working, carefully positioning each granite boulder with the precision of a master mason. What did this German blacksmith understand about surviving winter that his experienced American neighbors had completely missed? Before we reveal exactly how Klaus's stupid stone bed would soon save lives during the coldest winter in New Jersey's recorded history, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Klaus's method defied every principle of sensible winter preparation that his neighbors had learned through decades of hard experience and countless near-death encounters with brutal cold that could kill unprepared settlers within hours. While everyone else focused on insulation, draft-proofing, and keeping precious heat inside their living spaces, Klaus was building what appeared to be a massive heat sink, specifically designed to steal warmth from anyone foolish enough to sleep on it. The stone platform measured exactly 8 feet long by 4 feet wide by 18 inches high, constructed from carefully selected granite fieldstones, weighing between 15 and 40 pounds each. Every single stone positioned with mathematical precision that suggested Klaus was following some invisible blueprint that only he could understand. He'd mortared the stones together using a mixture of local clay and dried marsh grass, creating a solid, monolithic mass weighing over 8,000 pounds, sitting directly on his cabin's wooden floor, which Samuel Hartwell calculated would create structural stresses far beyond what any reasonable floor system could safely support without catastrophic collapse. Above this massive stone foundation, Klaus built a thin wooden platform topped with a straw-filled mattress, positioning his actual sleeping area exactly 12 inches above the stone surface, creating what appeared to be the most elaborate and expensive way imaginable to freeze to death in comfort. The construction required precise measurements, careful load distribution, and sophisticated understanding of structural engineering that impressed even his harshest critics from a purely technical perspective, though they remained convinced that Klaus was building an elaborate suicide device with remarkable craftsmanship and attention to detail. The criticism grew louder and more pointed as Klaus's bizarre project neared completion, and the first snowflakes began falling across the pine barrens. Samuel Hartwell brought 3 other experienced carpenters to inspect the work in detail, all of them shaking their heads in professional dismay and offering increasingly dire predictions about the inevitable failure and potentially deadly consequences of Klaus's experiment. "That's near 4 tons of solid rock inside a residential cabin," Samuel declared, running his experienced hands along the mortar joints and testing the structural integrity with the practiced eye of a master builder. "Gonna collapse the whole damn floor system by Christmas morning, and for what? A bed that'll freeze you solid before New Year's Eve. I've built homes for 20 years across 3 states, and this violates every principle of safe construction and sensible heating that keeps people alive through winter." Thomas Creek was equally vocal about the project's fundamental flaws, drawing on his extensive experience with winter survival in conditions harsh enough to kill unprepared men within hours of exposure. "I've been heating homes and staying alive in the wilderness for 20 years, Muller. I know what works and what kills you. Stone draws heat right out of your body faster than you can possibly make it. That's exactly why we build wooden floors over stone foundations, to keep the cold from creeping up through the ground and into your bones. You're basically building yourself an expensive grave with remarkable attention to detail." Dr. Hayes, representing the settlement's scientific authority and medical expertise, offered a clinical perspective that seemed to seal Klaus's fate with unassailable medical logic. The human body loses heat through conduction when in contact with cold surfaces, and this is basic thermodynamics that any medical school teaches in first-year physiology. Stone has extremely high thermal conductivity, meaning it will rapidly draw body heat away from anyone sleeping on it. The physiological effect will be similar to lying naked on ice during a blizzard. This construction is not merely inefficient, it's potentially lethal. I predict severe hypothermia within 3 hours of direct contact, assuming the victim survives that long. Even Klaus's fellow German immigrants, who might have been expected to support a countryman's innovative approach, questioned his sanity and began distancing themselves from what they increasingly saw as embarrassing and dangerous behavior that reflected poorly on their entire community. Heinrich Zimmermann, who'd arrived from Bavaria the previous spring with his wife and 4 children, visited Klaus's cabin to examine the construction and left shaking his head in cultural embarrassment and genuine concern. In the old country, we know stone is for foundations and walls, not for beds where people sleep and try to stay warm. My grandfather was a master stonemason in the Black Forest region, and he would roll over in his grave seeing this kind of foolishness. Klaus has forgotten the wisdom of our fathers and grandfathers, and he's going to pay for it with his life. The local blacksmith, James Morrison, put it bluntly during a gathering at Patterson's General Store. Muller's lost his mind. Come January, we'll be digging his frozen corpse out from under that pile of rocks. Klaus continued working silently through all the ridicule, displaying quiet determination that his critics would later recognize as genius. What Klaus understood, and what his critics had never considered, was thermal mass. Thermal mass represents the ability of dense materials to absorb, store, and slowly release large amounts of heat energy over extended periods, functioning essentially like a thermal battery that can provide consistent warmth long after the original heat source has been extinguished. While lightweight materials like wood, fabric, and air heat up quickly when exposed to fire, but also lose that heat rapidly when the heat source is removed, dense materials like stone, brick, and concrete can absorb enormous quantities of heat energy and release it steadily over many hours or even days, depending on the mass involved and the temperature differential achieved during the heating cycle. This principle, while completely foreign to Klaus's American neighbors, had been understood and utilized by various cultures around the world for thousands of years. Granite, the specific type of stone Klaus had carefully chosen for his thermal mass platform, holds 0.19 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit of temperature increase. With 8,000 pounds of granite in his massive platform, Klaus had essentially created a thermal battery capable of storing over 1,500 BTUs per degree of temperature increase achieved by the stone mass during heating cycles. To put this in perspective, that demonstrates the enormous energy storage potential. A typical wood-burning fireplace produces approximately 20,000 BTUs per hour, but delivers that heat unevenly throughout the space, with most of the precious energy lost up the chimney and only brief periods of intense heat, followed by rapid cooling as the fire burns down. Klaus's revolutionary system would capture and store heat during evening fires, then release it gradually throughout the night and well into the following day, providing consistent, comfortable temperatures for 12 to 18 hours after the fire was completely extinguished and cold ashes remained in the firebox. The science behind thermal mass heating stretches back thousands of years across multiple continents and cultures that had discovered these principles independently through necessity and careful observation of natural thermal processes. Korean ondol systems, developed over 2,000 years ago during the Three Kingdoms period, used heated stone floors to warm entire homes with remarkable efficiency, channeling hot combustion gases through carefully designed stone passages that absorbed and stored heat for gradual release throughout the day and night. These systems could maintain comfortable temperatures for 18 to 24 hours from a single heating cycle, allowing families to stay warm with minimal fuel consumption even during brutal Korean winters. Native American tribes across the northern plains had long known that heated stones could provide life-saving warmth for hours after a fire died completely, regularly carrying heated rocks into their shelters during the most brutal winter conditions when fires couldn't be safely maintained inside enclosed spaces. The Lakota, Cherokee, and other tribes developed sophisticated techniques for heating stones to specific temperatures, wrapping them in buffalo hides or woven materials, and using them to warm sleeping areas throughout the night when outdoor fires would be extinguished by wind or snow. Even the ancient Romans understood these thermal principles deeply, building elaborate hypocaust systems that circulated warm air and hot combustion gases through stone and tile flooring, achieving remarkably efficient heating in massive public buildings and private homes using relatively small amounts of fuel compared to direct heating methods. These systems heated stone floors that would maintain comfortable temperatures for hours after the fires were banked, demonstrating the practical effectiveness of thermal mass heating on a scale that served entire cities. Klaus had likely learned similar techniques from his grandfather, Johann Müller, who'd worked as a master stonemason in the Black Forest region of southwestern Germany, where thermal mass heating was common knowledge in mountain villages that faced brutal alpine winters lasting 6 months or more. German building traditions, developed over centuries of survival in harsh climates, included sophisticated understanding of thermal dynamics that most American frontier settlers had never encountered or considered. Klaus's seemingly crazy construction actually represented generations of accumulated wisdom about efficient heating in cold climates, knowledge that had been refined through countless winters and proven effective in conditions far more severe than anything New Jersey typically experienced. The critics weren't entirely wrong about stone's thermal properties, which made their skepticism understandable and their concerns legitimate based on limited understanding of thermal dynamics. Stone does conduct heat rapidly in both directions, which means it feels cold to the touch when it's actually at room temperature, because it draws heat from your skin faster than wood, fabric, or other insulating materials. This immediate sensation of coldness occurs even when the stone itself isn't particularly cold, because the rapid heat transfer from warm skin to cooler stone creates the physiological impression of extreme cold, even at moderate temperatures. However, this same thermal conductivity works powerfully in reverse when the stone has been heated above ambient temperature through direct contact with hot combustion gases. Hot stone releases that stored heat efficiently and consistently through radiation and convection, maintaining elevated temperatures for 8 to 12 hours after the heat source is completely removed, depending on the mass of stone involved and the peak temperature achieved during the heating cycle. Klaus's construction revealed his deep understanding of thermal dynamics. He built a small firebox directly beneath the stone platform, with a chimney that wound through the stone mass before exiting through the cabin wall. This meant hot combustion gases would heat the stones from within before escaping, maximizing heat transfer efficiency. The stone platform would absorb heat during evening fires, store that energy in its massive thermal mass, and release warmth gradually throughout the night. Klaus calculated that his system would maintain comfortable sleeping temperatures using about 60% less firewood than conventional heating methods. By mid-November, Klaus had completed his thermal mass heating system, just as neighbors were stockpiling what they hoped would be enough firewood to survive another harsh winter. Samuel Hartwell had cut and split 12 full cords of oak and maple. Thomas Creek had spent 2 weeks reinforcing his fireplace and chimney. Dr. Hayes had imported an expensive iron stove from Philadelphia. Everyone prepared for winter in their own way, but nobody expected what was coming. December 15, 1879, marked the beginning of the most severe and prolonged winter weather event that New Jersey had experienced in recorded meteorological history, with temperatures that would test every heating system, every winter preparation, and every survival technique to their absolute limits and beyond. The first Arctic blast arrived without any warning from the weather observers in Philadelphia, dropping temperatures from a moderate 32 degrees Fahrenheit to a deadly 12 below zero within just 6 hours, accompanied by howling winds from the northwest that sustained speeds of 35-45 miles per hour and made the effective air temperature feel like 30 below zero, creating wind chill conditions that could freeze exposed human skin within 3 to 5 minutes of contact. Snow began falling at exactly noon on December 15th and continued without interruption for 4 consecutive days, accumulating to unprecedented depths of 38 inches across Pemberton Township and surrounding areas, with wind-driven drifts reaching 6 to 8 feet in protected areas where the relentless northwest winds deposited massive quantities of snow that blocked doors, covered windows, and made travel between buildings virtually impossible even for short distances. This wasn't merely severe cold weather by typical frontier standards. This was a genuine life-threatening Arctic assault that combined extreme cold, heavy snow, and sustained high winds into a weather system that challenged the survival capabilities of even the most experienced and well-prepared frontier families. The storm system, later analyzed and documented by weather observers at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, represented the collision of an unprecedented Arctic air mass from northern Canada with a moisture-laden system moving north from the Atlantic Ocean, creating perfect meteorological conditions for extreme cold combined with heavy snow that would persist for nearly a full week. Samuel Hartwell's cabin, built with expensive double-wall construction and featuring a massive fieldstone fireplace that measured 8 feet wide and had successfully kept his family warm through 15 previous winters, struggled desperately to maintain even marginally livable temperatures despite burning premium seasoned oak constantly at a rate that consumed his carefully gathered fuel reserves far faster than he'd ever imagined possible. Hartwell fed split oak logs, weighing 15 to 20 pounds each, into his enormous fireplace every 45 minutes throughout both day and night, getting virtually no sleep as he maintained the fire that literally stood between his family and death from exposure in their own home. Despite his massive fireplace that consumed over a cord of wood every 3 days, and despite constant feeding of premium hardwood that had been seasoned for 2 full years, Hartwell's cabin interior temperature never rose above a frigid 42 degrees Fahrenheit during the worst of the 6-day cold snap. Ice crystals formed on the inside surfaces of his windows, despite being 20 feet from the fireplace. His water buckets froze solid within 2 hours, even when kept near the hearth, and frost accumulated on the interior walls where his breath condensed and froze immediately upon contact with the cold surfaces. Thomas Creek faced even more dire conditions in his smaller cabin, which had always provided adequate warmth during previous winters, but proved tragically inadequate against this unprecedented Arctic assault that overwhelmed every heating system in the settlement. Despite running his fireplace continuously for 72 hours straight and burning through 3 full days' worth of carefully rationed firewood in a single night, Creek's cabin interior temperature dropped to a life-threatening 38 degrees Fahrenheit, just 6 degrees above the freezing point of water. His family's water bucket froze solid within 2 hours of being brought indoors, and Creek himself developed painful chilblains and early-stage frostbite on his fingers and toes from constant exposure to near-freezing conditions inside what should have been the safety of his own home. Creek's wife, Margaret, bundled their 3 children together in a single bed, piling every blanket, quilt, and piece of warm clothing they owned on top of the children. But even this desperate measure couldn't prevent the children from shivering uncontrollably throughout the night, their small bodies losing heat faster than they could generate it despite being fully clothed and wrapped in every warm material the family possessed. Dr. Hayes's modern iron stove initially seemed promising, heating his cabin to 58 degrees during the first day. However, the stove consumed firewood at an alarming rate, burning through Hayes's calculated fuel supply faster than expected. By the third day, Hayes was rationing wood and allowing his cabin temperature to drop into the 40s. Martha Patterson, living alone with only a basic fireplace, found herself in genuine danger as temperatures inside her home dropped to 36 degrees despite burning spare furniture. The crisis deepened on December 18th when Thomas Creek's youngest daughter, 8-year-old Sarah, developed pneumonia from prolonged exposure to cold. Creek wrapped the child in every blanket he owned and kept her as close to the fireplace as possible, but her fever climbed dangerously high. Dr. Hayes examined Sarah by firelight in Creek's frigid cabin, his hands shaking from cold. "She needs to be kept warm constantly," Hayes told Creek. "If her body temperature drops any further, I don't know if she'll recover." Creek looked around his ice-cold cabin and realized he had no way to provide the steady warmth his daughter needed to survive. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button and comment below with other forgotten winter heating methods you'd like me to investigate. Meanwhile, Klaus Mueller's cabin maintained a steady 68 degrees throughout the entire cold snap. His stone bed released gentle, consistent heat that kept the sleeping area warm enough that Klaus never needed more than a light blanket. The thermal mass system worked exactly as he'd calculated, storing heat from evening fires and releasing it gradually through the night. While his neighbors burned firewood frantically just to prevent freezing, Klaus used less than half a cord during the entire 6-day Arctic siege. On December 19th, Thomas Creek swallowed his pride and knocked on Klaus's door, carrying his sick daughter wrapped in quilts. "Klaus," Creek said, his voice breaking, "Sarah's burning up with fever, but my cabin's too cold to help her fight it. Could she stay here until this weather breaks?" Klaus immediately welcomed Creek and his daughter without hesitation. Sarah spent 3 days recovering on Klaus's stone bed system, her fever breaking as her body finally had the consistent warmth needed to fight the infection. Creek later admitted that Klaus's ridiculous heating system had saved his daughter's life. Word spread quickly about the miraculous warmth of Klaus's cabin. Samuel Hartwell visited on December 20th to see the system for himself, carrying a thermometer to verify what seemed impossible. The outdoor temperature read 14 below zero, yet Klaus's cabin interior measured 64 degrees with no fire currently burning. Hartwell watched in amazement as Klaus lit a small fire in the underground firebox, explaining how heated gases warmed the stone mass before exiting through the chimney. "I've been building for 20 years, Hartwell said quietly. "I never understood thermal mass like this. I was wrong, Klaus. This works." Dr. Hayes arrived the following day with scientific instruments to study Klaus's heating system. Hayes measured the stone surface temperature at 78 degrees, 12 hours after Klaus had extinguished his evening fire. The stones were still releasing stored heat at a rate that kept the sleeping platform at 72 degrees. "The thermal retention is remarkable," Hayes admitted. "These stones are functioning as a massive heat reservoir, providing consistent warmth with minimal fuel input. I grossly underestimated the efficiency of thermal mass heating." Klaus generously shared detailed construction plans with anyone who asked, never gloating about his vindication or charging for his knowledge. He drew precise diagrams showing the firebox placement, stone arrangement, and chimney routing that made his system work effectively. Klaus explained that the key wasn't just using stones for thermal mass, but creating efficient heat transfer from the fire to the stone and from the stone to the living space. The underground firebox and serpentine chimney path ensured maximum heat absorption, while the elevated sleeping platform provided comfortable radiant heating without direct contact with hot stone. Over the following weeks, 17 families in Pemberton Township requested Klaus's help, designing thermal mass heating systems for their own cabins. Klaus supervised construction projects for Samuel Hartwell, Thomas Creek, Dr. Hayes, and 14 other neighbors, adapting his design to fit different cabin sizes and layouts. Hartwell's system used locally quarried sandstone instead of granite, but achieved similar thermal performance. Greek built a smaller version using river stones, which worked effectively in his compact cabin. Dr. Hayes combined Claus's thermal mass principles with his iron stove, creating a hybrid system that stored and released heat more efficiently. The adaptation of Claus's design revealed the versatility of thermal mass heating principles. Heinrich Zimmermann built a double-platform system that heated both sleeping and food storage areas. Martha Patterson worked with Claus to design a thermal mass bench that served as both seating and heating during the day, then provided radiant warmth at night. James Morrison integrated thermal mass stones into his forge area, capturing waste heat from metalworking to warm his living quarters. By spring 1880, 43 families across 3 townships had implemented some version of Claus's thermal mass heating system. Fuel consumption data collected by Dr. Hayes showed average firewood savings of 52% compared to traditional fireplace heating. Samuel Hartwell documented that his thermal mass system maintained comfortable temperatures using 2.8 cords of wood per winter, compared to the 6.2 cords he'd previously burned. The economic impact was substantial, as firewood represented one of the largest winter expenses for frontier families. The thermal mass heating revolution spread beyond Pemberton Township, as traveling merchants and visiting relatives carried news of the innovation to other settlements. Claus's designs reached communities in Pennsylvania, New York, and as far west as Ohio, where German immigrant communities quickly adopted and refined the techniques. Local variations emerged based on available stone types and regional building traditions, but the fundamental principles remained consistent. Use dense materials to store heat, design efficient heat transfer systems, and release stored energy gradually over time. Claus Müller died peacefully on March 15, 1923, at age 89, having spent his final years teaching thermal mass construction to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. His original stone bed system continued functioning effectively until the cabin was demolished in 1947, nearly 70 years after construction. Archaeological excavations in 1998 uncovered the foundations of Claus's thermal mass system, with many original stones still in place, and showing clear evidence of heat exposure and thermal cycling. Modern building science has validated Claus's intuitive understanding of thermal mass principles. Contemporary research by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory confirms that thermal mass can reduce heating energy consumption by 40–70% in properly designed systems. Green building techniques increasingly incorporate thermal mass elements like concrete floors, stone walls, and phase-change materials that store and release heat exactly as Claus's system did 140 years ago. The passive house movement relies heavily on thermal mass concepts to achieve ultra-low energy consumption. The near loss of traditional thermal mass knowledge represents a broader pattern of forgetting practical wisdom in favor of energy-intensive modern solutions. Claus's neighbors initially rejected his methods because they contradicted conventional thinking and required faith in unfamiliar principles. Today's builders often repeat this mistake, dismissing traditional techniques as primitive rather than recognizing the sophisticated understanding of natural systems they represent. Claus's story reminds us that innovation often looks like madness until proven by results, and that questioning conventional wisdom can literally save lives. Give this video a like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what other historical building techniques you want me to investigate. Next time, we're diving into how a Norwegian immigrant's underground greenhouse produced fresh vegetables all winter in Minnesota during the blizzard of 1888, while his neighbors survived on salt pork and hardtack.